Welcome to the New Hampshire Union Leaders Voters First Forums. My name is Joe McQuaid, publisher of the Union Leader.
And I'm Todd Fahey, State Director of AARP New Hampshire. AARP is a nonpartisan advocacy organization. We're looking forward to hearing candidate positions on important issues. This year, we're focused on Social Security and what candidates will do to ensure that this program remains strong and available for future generations.
If you're watching this live on YouTube, feel free to submit a question. And now, let's hear from a candidate. So I'll say on the record, welcome, Senator Forrester. Thank you for coming in to be subjected to all kinds of questions out of left field from Kevin Landrigan and Trent Spinner and myself.
Right field?
Right field, left field. The guy who was in before you this morning said, New Hampshire's now a purple state. I said, yeah, I guess so. And he said, so that means you guys are now purple instead of red at the Union Leader? Clueless, Flanagan. But you were wearing purple, so what's the story here?
Well, purple is my campaign color.
Oh, it's also the state flower and the state bird?
Yes.
So that's good.
And green is my other color.
Green is good as well. You could consult on the City of Manchester flag. There's a big debate going on. Candidate Frank Edelblut was in here earlier this week, and he said he has the New Hampshire Right to Life endorsement.
He does.
So
I was not aware of that.
Do you have a New Hampshire Right to Life endorsement?
I believe I've had one in the past. I'm not sure where I'm at right now. I've been focusing on running my campaign.
Yeah. But you are a Right to Life
Absolutely.
person.
Yeah, so definitely pro-life, and what's interesting, what I have found interesting in this campaign, because I've appeared many places with the other candidates in forums and debates, and I always lead off by saying, I believe I'm the real conservative with real experience in this race, and what I mean by that when I talk about conservative principles is that I believe in limited government, personal responsibility, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-Second Amendment, and I have taken the pledge against the sales and income tax. And what I find interesting is that none of the other candidates, even Mr. Edelblut, will talk about his conservative principles when we are together in a forum. So I'm not sure why that is.
Is it that he's not being asked? He sounded pretty conservative when he was in here, but then again, so did Teddy Gatzis.
But I don't think that you should have to be asked. I think it's important for people to understand kind of what your values are, and that you should not be ashamed to share those values with people.
What do you consider the three most important jobs for a governor?
I think the most important would be to lead. I think for too long we have had governors who haven't led, and in particular in this last 4 years, a governor who's been so focused on running for the U.S. Senate and not leading the state that we've got some issues and some problems. So leading in the state, certainly protecting our citizens is very important, and I think being somebody who can be trusted, somebody who you know where they stand on an issue. You might not always like what they have to say, you might not agree, but you know you can trust them.
I was looking more at the nitty-gritty. What does a governor do? What is your first responsibility as governor?
Well, my first responsibility is to the people of the state of New Hampshire.
Right, but hint, don't you have something to do with the budget when you're governor?
Okay. So, yes, is building a state budget, and that budget should be responsible. It should be balanced. It should be based on revenues that are responsible and reasonable, and we live within those means.
And have you any experience with the state budget?
Thank you, Joe. I am the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. I've sat on Senate Finance. I've been on the Finance Committee for 6 years. I was the only freshman to be put on Finance in my first term. And I think it's been 2.5 years that I've been the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. So I certainly have the experience, more experience than I would say any of the candidates in terms of building a state budget. I've been involved in building 3.
Have you, you're busy on the campaign right now,
Yes.
but it's not that long before the campaign is over and somebody is in the corner office.
Yeah.
Have you given any thought to what a Forrester budget would be like, how big it would be, whether it would be an increase or a decrease, and where the money would come from?
Well, I think that certainly in the last 6 years, we have been very responsible in building the state budgets, and I would follow that track. So we're at, I think, about 11.5 billion right now. It would be, you know, if it were going to be an increase, it would be a minor increase, maybe 3 to 5%. I don't know. You'd have to look at what our priorities in the state are. You'd have to look at what our revenues are coming in, and what's going on in the state at the time. But certainly one of the things that we've done in this last budget that I've been very proud of is the fact that we've started to rebuild the rainy day fund, which I think is a significant positive step forward for the state.
There's been a lot of talk and reporting in the newspapers about the revenues and how the revenues have come in and they've
Yep.
been strong, but there seems to be a problem finding out what the expenses are.
Yes, that is true. And in fact, this morning I was visiting with the legislative budget assistant, asking just that question, because we continue to ask those questions. Where are those expenses? Why aren't we seeing them? And when I'm out on the campaign trail and people ask me that, they say, well, why can't you force the governor to do this? And she's just simply, between her and I think the folks who report to her, they're just simply not providing us that information, and it is frustrating. We have a law, and they're ignoring the law.
Is it because they just can't, they don't have the technical resources to find out where the expenditures are at, or they really don't want anybody to know?
I think a little of both. I certainly think a little of both, yeah.
So what would you do on the technical side? I mean, does money have to be applied to get the computers up to snuff to
Yeah.
show us where the money is?
And it may be, it may very well be it. But I think the problem is that we really don't know really what the issues are, because there is a lack of transparency. So I would hesitate to say, yes, we have to throw money in, upgrade systems, because I'm not really sure what the problem is. I hear it's a little bit of both, but until I actually get in there and find out, and we can actually find out what's happening, I would hesitate to say, yes, we need to throw money, we need to upgrade systems, until I know.
While you were chair of Senate Finance, the budget was vetoed. What would you do as governor? And people on both sides of the issue say that veto created some issues, including, earlier today we were talking about how money for people who were addicted to opioids weren't able to get some of the help that they needed because
Sure.
the budget was vetoed. What would you do differently as governor?
Well, I wouldn't veto the budget, I'm guessing. That was a very good budget, and there was no reason for this governor to veto that budget. You know, I mean, her reason for vetoing it was going to blow an $80 million hole, because we started this process of reducing business profits tax and business enterprise taxes. And here we are, way ahead in revenues. So clearly she didn't know what she was talking about. And in terms of what would I do differently, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat, so I can't get into the mind of what she does and how I would do anything differently from what she does. But I would work very closely with the Senate and the House on making sure that we're all on the same page and communicating about what are the priorities for the state and how we keep a balanced budget that doesn't have new taxes and fees for the state for the residents in the state of New Hampshire. And that clearly was not something that she did with us, I can tell you that.
Let me try and ask my question better.
Okay, sorry.
There was disagreement about business taxes.
Yep.
There was just a fundamental disagreement. If you're governor and the Senate or the House and they don't agree with you on some fundamental issue, you're the leader of the state. Let's talk about leadership. How would you work around that problem?
Well, and I don't know if it's working around it, but rather working through it. And I think, again, I go back to that's the problem I have found with this governor, is that she doesn't come together, she doesn't communicate. As governor, I would be having those conversations frequently and bringing the leaders to the table. That didn't happen. It was really very isolated, and there was no working together. And that's what I would do differently in terms of having that communication. And look, I said this before, we're not always going to agree on all the issues, but to have the communication, to figure out what the goals are and working together to get there.
Senator, is education funding something that needs to be addressed through a constitutional amendment, or are we okay the way it is? Is the funding sufficient and the funding mechanism sufficient?
I think certainly it is an issue that we need to look at, and I would entertain a constitutional amendment, certainly. I think that rather than talking about more resources towards that, how can we do it better than what we're doing now? And I think you probably know I'm a big advocate for choice. I believe that parents know best what's right for their children in terms of education. I would support charter schools, and I have actually in the past. And actually, I'm a founding member of a charter school in Franklin. I supported the educational tax credit when it came up in my first term. So it's about choice, it's about having parents involved, and it's about making sure that we're spending the dollars that we have wisely and getting the results that we need to get. So it's, I go back to I guess my basic philosophy is that we shouldn't always just jump to the conclusion that it requires more money.
I'm sure there are going to be other questions on the budget. One that came up yesterday in Concord relative to dealing with the drug crisis was the Liquor Commission, the fund established, a dedicated fund from liquor revenues, which hasn't been fully funded except for the first time out.
Right.
I was struck by what one of the Governor's Commission people said, that alcohol is a much bigger problem than the opioid crisis. And he seemed to be saying that any revenues from this fund would go strictly to alcohol programs.
Really?
Yeah, and which just surprised me. I thought the focus on getting that fund back up to what it's supposed to be was to use some of that for the opiate drug crisis.
And it should be, and I will tell you, I sit on the Governor's Commission, and the plan that they rolled out a couple years ago, Collective Action, Collective Impact, does include the issues of drugs and alcohol. So the heroin and opioid crisis was part of that and should be part of that. I today got an update just to see where we were at in spending on this particular issue. $101 million is what we're spending in the state of New Hampshire on this issue right now.
On drug and alcohol abuse?
Yes, on the heroin and opioid issue, and there would be alcohol in terms of prevention education programs as well. And so I say that because I think it's important. This morning I was speaking at a Rotary Club and talking to them about the crisis that we're facing, and when I hear some of the other candidates talk about the idea that we should think about decriminalizing marijuana or even legalizing marijuana, it makes absolutely no sense to me, and I really question the judgment on that because, again, we've got a crisis. We're spending $101 million on this issue, state and federal funding, that we could perhaps be spending on other things, like, let's say, school building aid or whatever it might be. But we're dedicated to fixing this problem, and we need somebody in the corner office who's going to be 100% dedicated to it, but sending us a message that is clear and concise and straightforward and not sending mixed signals. We heard one of the candidates say, well, we've got all these people in our jails because of small amounts of marijuana. Well, we know that's not true. I've talked to law enforcement and the county attorneys, and they tell us that's absolutely not true. The other, excuse that he used was that, well, our forensic labs are all backed up because of small amounts of marijuana. So I called, Tim Pfeiffer.
He's still there. Huh?
He is. And because one thing you'll know about me is I won't always have all the answers, but I will do my homework and I will work with people because I think that's critically important. So I called him and I asked him, and he said, we are backed up in the lab. I think he said we get about 750, 770 cases a month. And with our 6 staff people, we're able to process maybe 550. So we absolutely are backed up, but it's not because of small amounts of marijuana. It's because of heroin and fentanyl. And oh yes, we do have problems with marijuana cases, but we're talking about pounds of marijuana. We're not talking about, ounces of marijuana. So I just, this Rotary Club that I spoke to this morning was very, very interested and concerned about how the state is moving forward on this issue. And I think most people, when I talk to them, agree with me that we shouldn't be going down that road.
You turned some heads the other day when you suggested that the National Guard be put on the borders of Canada and in Massachusetts. You didn't mention Vermont, which I think has always been the political problem. But have you talked with law enforcement people about this idea?
I have. And one of the things that I have said in building the plans that I've rolled out is I don't operate in a vacuum, whether it was my Take Back New Hampshire drug program or the economic plan or anything. I like to talk to a lot of different people and get their input and their feedback. And on this particular issue, I think it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago about being a leader in the state, in the corner office, that you're sending a signal, we are done with this, we are serious about this. And so, sending the National Guard to the border, within the powers that I have as governor and talking with other governors, whether it's on the Texas border or our own borders, you certainly have to have those conversations. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but to send the signal, to send the message that we are serious about this. And I can tell you that up in the northern part of the state, they have some issues. We passed a piece of legislation this session to help the law enforcement up there join with the Border Patrol to be able to have the Border Patrol help them because they need help because law enforcement is so sparse up there. I went on a ride-along with a trooper, the commander of Troop F up there, and we were in one part of the county and he got a call, needed help from another law enforcement officer. It took us almost an hour to get there. And the guy had pulled somebody over, had a gun sitting on a seat that wasn't registered. So there's some scary things going on, and I think relative to the drug issue, it's a crisis in the state. We are spending $101 million on it. We have to be serious about that. And when I talk about in my drug plan that if somebody sells drugs to somebody who dies of an overdose, they should be tried for murder, and if convicted, face life in prison without parole. We need people to understand we're serious in the state. We can't do anything halfway.
Just to get some specifics on the National Guard plan, are you
Sure.
talking about having National Guard members at every entrance to the state? I mean, what does it look like? And then the $1 million or the $100 million question is, who's paying for it? How are we paying for it?
And so it's a concept, it's an idea. And when I'm governor, it would be a conversation that I would sit down and talk to other governors about. It's not something you do in isolation. I would talk to all the leaders in the state about what that looks like and how it would be paid for. It's a concept, it's an idea, it's something that we need to be thinking about. We need every tool in the toolbox that we have to stop this crisis.
With regard to the opioid issue and your plan, as you know, there's an education requirement in the legislation that passed. But you seem to want to go further than that in terms of prevention and bringing the understanding of the seriousness of drug abuse into the schools. Could you speak a little specifically?
Sure.
What would you like to do? What should happen in the
Sure.
school?
So again, there's an example where I sat down and talked with a principal, superintendent of schools. I talked to somebody in the nonprofit world who deals with this, former substance abuse counselor, about what does this look like in our schools. And what we came up with in this conversation is this idea that it needs to be consistent. K through 12 needs to be science-based. So when I say that, I mean just like, let's say when we taught young people why it was bad to smoke. we would show them the diseased lung, and kids are smart. So we do the same thing with drugs. You can't just say no, you have to teach them the science behind it. You know, this is what drugs will do to your brain. This is why it's not a good thing for you to do. I was at the Franklin Drug Task Force last week, and one of the things that they're doing is they're doing this artwork where the young people are doing it, and it depicts people who have these problems, so it's not cool. Remember cigarette smoking, they showed it on TV and it was a cool thing to do. Well, we have to get, the messages have to start to be really clear, and it needs to happen in the schools, it needs to happen on TV and the media. Do you remember the commercial that used to be on TV with the egg? Here's your brain on drugs in the frying pan. We don't have that anymore. What we have is on TV is pushing pills. There's a pill for every little ailment that you might have, but there's no messaging on TV or social.
Is there no education about drugs? I thought
In the schools?
I thought there was, and it hasn't been very effective.
Well, that's the key. It hasn't been effective because it hasn't been consistent. So let's take the DARE program. When I talk to young college students who had the DARE program in school, it's very isolated. It's on maybe one or two, at least what they tell me, one or two drugs or one or two issues. I'm talking about, you know, and age appropriate from K through 12, you know, early and often through the grades. What's happening now is that it's intermittent. It may be up here when you're, I don't know, 12, 14 years old. Well, you should be learning down here. Just like we taught kids how to buckle up for safety, right? I mean, kids know that. They've been taught that. And so if you teach it, if you start young, and again, age appropriate, and you have the teachers, and I've talked to the teachers. I've visited schools and asked them, you know, would you be open to this? And there has been a lot of interest in this.
Senator, you said that you favor turning power back to individuals and small businesses. Can you be specific? Is there a specific example of how this would be done? What kind of power are you talking about that would be turned back to the people?
Yeah. So, you know, as a former Main Street director and as a town administrator.
Explain what Main Street is for those who might not know.
So Main Street program is economic development based on historic preservation. And so basically you're working on Main Street with small businesses, you're trying to preserve the historic buildings in the downtown, and you want to make your community successful. So that's Main Street. Town administrator in two different communities, Tufton Borough and New Durham. And what I had observed in the years that I was doing that kind of work is that there was more and more power being taken away from communities for them to be able to really do what was best for their community. So I'll give you one specific example that comes to my mind. So when I was a town administrator, I want to say it was in, I think it was New Durham or Tufton Borough, I can't remember which specifically, but I was the town administrator and I was also the welfare administrator. So when a person needed help for food, they would come to me and I would have this little pad with a carbon copy on it still, and I would write out $150 for food at the local Hannaford's, and I would write in the little note section, no tobacco or alcohol can be purchased. Very specifically in the community, we had control. We know the people in our community, and we know who needs the help, we know who's abusing the help or abusing the system. Well, fast forward to now, we have EBT cards. And so there's no really sense of what's happening, and communities don't have that. They don't have that first, kind of hands-on experience or hands-on interaction with their community. And I think that's an important.
When did that change? I thought the local was always the one community of of last resort, if you will. If their state benefits had been turned down or run out,
Yeah.
the town has to.
And they do, and they still have to.
Yeah.
But the EBT card has changed that kind of, I want to say, local understanding of what's happening in community, because now it's happening at the state level.
So are you suggesting that the EBT card be done away with and that the funds go to the town of New Durham?
I would be okay with that, because I think communities know best. And in my first term, one of the things I did was have a roundtable discussion with welfare administrators. I brought them in, and I also brought somebody in from the state who administered the program of welfare administration, to have that communication and understanding, because I find a lot of times, and it, go much to the question that you had about what would I do different as governor in terms of the budget. There's a lack of communication, and so there's a lack of trust. And the welfare administrators, at least that I talked to, didn't believe that the state had their best interests at heart, and the state really doesn't know what's happening at a local level. And I think that's one of the things that I really want to change. I want to have this relationship between the state and the communities, that we can all be working together, because I do believe that communities know best how to run their communities, and the state should be there to serve the communities, not the other way around.
What is happening at the state hospital with the contract having lapsed with Dartmouth Medical School, and the successful bidder is Dartmouth Hitchcock, but they don't seem to have complete staffing because of the labor dispute. And our Sunday News had a story 3 days ago that a woman who had been at the state hospital for just a few hours was released and jumped to her death in Nashua, and a state hospital administration member told our guy that part of the problem was the staffing problem there. Is that something that, never mind you as governor, as you as a state senator or the state senate, can they do anything about, or is this strictly in the executive branch?
I believe it's an executive branch issue. Look, this governor if you remember, it wasn't too long ago, got highly involved in a local supermarket issue. She stepped in. I'm not sure why. Well, I know why she hasn't stepped in. She's campaigning. So, this is a leadership issue, and this governor should be right on top of this and doing whatever it takes to make sure these kinds of things don't happen, and that we have the staff. I mean, we funded those mental health beds, in the budget. Why no one was looking forward and saying, okay, we have the money, what are going to be the potential problems in the future? What do we need to be doing now? What's the plan? There's a lack of leadership. And in my opinion, it falls on her shoulders.
But with regard to spending, we heard the mayor of Manchester critical of how quickly this money has gone out to fight the opioid crisis.
Or not quickly.
Right.
Right.
And your plans list a number of problems with government inertia. I guess you even suggest in one of your plans an audit of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah.
Now, that's not only a serious step, that's from someone who's in charge of writing the Senate budget, which, what is the problem here? I mean, is it incompetence? Is it just bureaucratic red tape?
I think it's bureaucratic red tape. Certainly we have some good folks over at, let's just take the Department of Health and Human Services, but I can tell you that when we built that budget and we appropriated those funds, one very specific program that is one that the state has done business with for years and years and years. It's a regional prevention program. $20,000 that we appropriated to this program that does a lot of good work in the northern part of the state. Took her 7 months to get that money. 7 months. Because,
From the time it was appropriate.
right, and because according to the conversation, it's the bureaucratic red tape. And so if this is a crisis, and I believe it is, why are we not streamlining? Why are we not cutting the red tape and getting that money out there? Because I believe, again, this governor's been absent. If this is the crisis that we all believe it is, then why isn't this being resolved, and why is the money not getting out the door? And I asked again today, this morning, where are we at? Where's the money? We can't get the answers.
So what would you do differently if you were governor and you read that story in the Sunday paper and that said that a woman jumped to her death after being released from the state hospital? What would you do? What would you do Monday morning?
Monday morning, I guess I would go over to the state hospital and I would sit down with the administrators and I would get the folks in at Dartmouth Hitchcock and I'd say, how are we going to solve this problem? Because this has got to stop. It's getting all the right people in the room and getting the problem solved. And that, I believe that's not happening now.
Okay. You've been an opponent of the Medicaid expansion plan, the second version. Talk a little bit about your own plan, which relies on health savings accounts, which I think for folks like us, many have operated with these.
Yeah.
You know, but how would that work for 50,000 low-income people who don't even have a job? How would they be able to navigate through a pretty complex healthcare system with a health savings account?
So you're talking about the health savings account, and one of the things that I talk about in my plan is this idea of voluntary health care. And not an original concept for me. I learned about it, Florida's doing it, and they're doing it very successfully. They have spent, I want to say, $2.6 billion in free care, over 400,000 people, to provide care to people who can't afford it. So that's what I'm talking about with the 50,000.
Okay.
The health savings account's a different population. But health savings, or excuse me, the voluntary care is, as I said, being used very successfully in Florida. They indemnify the doctors or the providers. And one of the things they found is that, and they also offer continuing education credits. And so this idea is they provide the free care. They don't have to worry about the malpractice insurance. They don't have to worry about the, there still is a potential for liability, but the state isn't indemnifying them. And in the course of time that Florida has done that, in all, I said $2.6 billion that they provide in free care, over 400,000 people. I think they've had just about over $200,000 in liability issues. That's pretty good.
Does the state force the doctors to do voluntary
No.
care? It's an option for them, and if they...
Absolutely. And there are doctors who have retired now, and that's what happens in Florida. There are providers who are actually still in practice, and there are people who are retired who want to, they've retired because they're tired of the paperwork and the malpractice insurance, and so no, it's not something forced. And New Hampshire is very different than Florida, so I can't, I can't say that what worked for Florida. We have to come up with a New Hampshire plan, and so this particular piece of legislation is a study committee, and we're going to look at how, and we've got all the stakeholders on this commission, and we're going to figure out how that works for New Hampshire, because I believe ultimately Medicaid will fail. One of the reasons I didn't support it this time is because the state was on the hook for $35 million. When I listened to testimony in the House from the providers and the insurance companies about how they were going to fill that gap, and the question was asked, are you going to pass that on to the private payers? They wouldn't answer the question. And I have heard from some hospitals, that one in particular, that they were concerned that they were even going to be able to make that payment, because the agreement was that the hospitals and the providers are going to take care of that shortfall.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were originally for Medicaid expansion.
I was.
What changed?
Sure, two different bills. So the first bill that I supported, it was 100% federally funded, and it had a sunset clause in it. And we had two options. It was either straight Medicaid expansion, or it was a New Hampshire Health Protection Plan, which is the plan that I did support. So, and this, fast forward to this bill, this one, I brought in an amendment to have a work requirement, and that was killed in the Senate. It's very frustrating that they wouldn't support that idea. When I think about the guy I know down the street who's working 2 jobs, right, to pay his medical bills, to support his family, and New Hampshireites are very generous people, but at a certain point, if this guy is struggling to pay his bills and this other person is essentially getting a free $10,000 free health care policy, and there's no work requirement, there's no requirement for community service or even having a job, you know, or looking for a job, that's just not right.
As a Republican-controlled state senate, why wasn't it passed? Your version, you know, the requirement for work, et cetera.
Well, I would say that there were some that felt that the federal government would reject it, and they didn't want to take the chance. I myself feel like you have to force them. You can't just give up before the fight even starts.
Explain your health savings account plan. HSAs have been around for a while. To whom would this apply?
So I would start with having that conversation with our Department of Administrative Services and actually even the unions about the benefits of having health savings accounts, because we know that if you have a high deductible and you can take those differential savings and plow it into a health savings account that rolls over year after year, and that you are in charge of your medical spending, that you're going to be more responsible. And it's a very, it's being used other places. It's a simple concept.
So you're suggesting this for state government?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
How do you get the unions to buy into that idea? Right now, the union members, they pay $15 to go to the doctor, and that's it. How are you going to say, I want you to be responsible, even if it's tax-free money, I want you to be responsible for a larger share? Aren't they going to say to you, Governor, we're going to want big raises? Right?
Well, I'm sure they will, but it's and another theme of kind of where I come from is this idea of communication, and I think that communication with the unions hasn't been a good relationship, and it's one we need to start to develop. And I think there are people in the union who would be open to this concept. I certainly believe that the Department of Administrative Services is open to that. And if we don't start coming up with some creative solutions, things are going to get worse and worse for whether they're benefits or retirement or whatever it is. So we've all got to start working together and coming up with solutions. And you just can't say, no, I want it to stay the way it's always been. The world has changed, and we have to figure out how to work together.
One of our sponsors for this series is AARP New Hampshire, and on the federal level, they're very interested in candidates' positions on Social Security. That's not a direct responsibility of the governor of the state, but we've asked other candidates for governor relative to the New Hampshire retirement system. What's your view of that? Is it stable? Is it underfunded? Is it in dire need? And are the towns and cities getting their fair share of this? Or should the state be doing more or less? Whose responsibility is it? Do that in 2 minutes, will you?
Well, certainly promises were made many, many years ago. And I think it originally started out being funded at 35%. And then by the state, with the promise to the communities that if you join our retirement system, we will kick this in. And over the years, and I think it was in my first term under John Lynch, he wanted to zero that out. And so the legislature, in response to that, to try to lessen that burden, if you will, came up with some changes to the retirement system, raised the age and all that. So we tried to make some changes that would look out to the future and lessen the burden on the cities and the towns. And I know that there is a movement now with the cities and towns to come back and say, you need to give this back to us because it's a burden on all of us. And I think certainly the state does bear some responsibility what that is and how much that is. I couldn't tell you that right now. I think it goes back to the beginning of our conversation about building a budget having responsible revenues, and setting priorities for the state. What are our priorities? When we've made promises, what promises do we keep? What promises do we have to give up? It's a conversation about priorities.
Well, as our editorial page editor, Mr. Bossy, has pointed out, if the state picks up across the board whatever percentage it is, that allows a town or city to be profligate in its spending versus another town or city who spends wisely. Why do the taxpayers in the towns that spend wisely have to pitch in for the town that is giving great raises and great retirements?
Or crazy raises in retirement. Absolutely, and that you're absolutely right, is that we have to, there have been times, it goes back to almost the notion of health savings accounts and having that, that personal responsibility as a community. If you do this, if you give them this amount of raise or this, whatever it might be in retirement, that it's going to be more of a burden on you. That might make them pay more attention if it's their money. I mean, clearly they're paying attention now because it's all on them. So they bear definitely responsibility on that too, and it isn't fair to the communities who have been responsible, not paid as much or given as much.
Has candidate for Governor Jeanie Forrester endorsed the presidential candidate of the Republican Party?
I've said that I will support him.
The AOT theory. Should be its name.
The AI theory.
Anything else, Kevin or Trent?
I think you're the only candidate I know of who's talked about bringing the governor's office and the legislature under the right to know law. We obviously would agree with that position, but what do you think? What will that fix that is wrong with state government right now?
I think it'll create more transparency in state government, and I think that's a problem. It goes back to one of the things I've said when I've been out talking with people is right now in this state, I think there is a real vacuum when it comes to trust in state government, trust in legislators, trust in state employees. By the things that I've seen in the 6 years that I've been in this position. So right to know, transparency can only help. It goes back again to communication and talking with people and being upfront. You're not always going to agree with everything I say, but you're always going to know where I'm at. And you might not like it, but it's who I am, right? And the same thing with transparency in state government. Yes, it might delay things, and yes, it might get some folks upset, but at least they're going to have that information. I think about, if I have really quickly a story. So a couple of weeks ago, I got a call got actually many calls on my cell phone from residents up in Plymouth who were furious about the Department of Transportation had come in to their community, residential community, and put down rumble strips right through the center of a residential fairly high traffic road where logging trucks go down. So you can imagine at 2 o'clock in the morning when the logging truck hits that rumble strip. So people were upset, they were outraged. And to his credit, I called the assistant commissioner and he came out and he heard the folks, and there were probably 30 people in this backyard, and we were talking, and the people would hit the rumble strips, and you'd hear how loud it was, and he listened to them. They were very, very angry, and he said he'd go back and figure it out, and he'd get back to us. And a couple days later, I called the commissioner, and she said, "Well, we'll figure something out by the end of the month." Short story, get to the end of it. They're going to remove the rumble strip, but those people were so angry and so distrustful of state government. How could you do this to us without talking to us, without communicating with us? This is our community, and you came in and did this. And the reason that was given to them was there's some analysis that was done that shows that if we do this, it'll eliminate fatalities, reduce fatalities. And the people said, but we haven't had any fatalities. Well, that's what the study says, so that's what we're going to do. So as a consequence, now we've wasted state employee, human resources in doing this, money to put the rumble strip in, and now we're taking it back out.
How long was this rumble strip?
Oh gosh, and it was probably a mile at least, and even when you turned, like the turn lane was rumble strip.
What route?
3A.
3A?
Yeah. And so the point of my telling you that story is that, state government might have good intentions, but when you don't communicate with people and when you do things that affect their lives that dramatically, they get angry, they get more and more distrustful. And I could tell you many, many stories in the 6 years that I've been in the state senate, which is one of the things that I've really loved about this job, is helping people. And I believe that experience and being at a very local level, that's what kind of sets me apart from the rest of the guys. That I'm going to go to the corner office, I'm going to focus 100% on this job. I'm not going to get in there and run for some other office. It's going to be 100% focused on the state of New Hampshire, and it's going to be representing people.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about something, because obviously we talk with the other party, and what do you think of Jeanie Forrester? Serious candidate for governor? I'll tell you what the Democrats say. They say she's smart, she doesn't think she's too smart, she does her homework, and we're going to go after her if she's the nominee on municipal resources, their involvement with the local government center, and the fact that Senate President Peter Bragdon leaves, becomes the head of LGC, and then 2 years later, he's gone. Do you think there was any conflict there? Do you think everything it was dealt with appropriately? How do you respond? Because like I said, this is, they're going to go after you with regard to this, so I want to give you that opportunity.
That's fine. In terms of anything that I did, I don't believe there's anything that I did wrong. I was named to a committee. I served on that committee. I have said from the very beginning, I started out that I was a town administrator. So I have a great interest in representing communities. And I will tell you that a lot of communities that I visited were very concerned about what was happening with their ability to have a choice for their insurance. And I supported my communities. And if somebody wants to take a hit at me for that, well, they can, but...
There was no quid pro quo to get that chairmanship of the Finance Committee.
No, he was gone. No. Senator Morse was the one who named me to the Finance Committee. I hadn't even heard that. No.
Must be coming down the pike. So, guides on the board is yes, rumble strips no. That's the Forrester plan.
I like that.
How about state police cameras? Do you think that's a wise investment for the state to equip state police officers with body cameras?
Well, I know, I talked to law enforcement about it, and they're supportive of it because they like the idea of that actually kind of protecting them. So are you asking, should the state pay for that? Mm-hmm. I have to think about that one. I'm not really sure. I know that right now the local communities who want it pay for it.
And that's the way the law was written,
Yeah.
right? Which was, it's voluntary. If a community wants it,
Right.
they pay for it.
I
We don't
hate
make it a state mandate, so
Right.
we don't have to pay for
Right.
it.
And I hate to, again, this idea of the overreach of state government into local communities, much like we see the federal government overreaching into the state. So I'm very much a proponent of local control, of locals knowing best, whether it's law enforcement or otherwise, what works for them.
In New Hampshire, when there's a police-involved shooting, we usually don't get the name of the police officer involved until the final report comes out. We had some reporting that could sometimes be hundreds of days. The Federal Department of Justice just issued some recommendations saying that those names should be released within the first 48 hours. Mm-hmm. The local Attorney General's office, they say, you know what, we need time to get this right. We only get one chance, and so we need to make sure we have all our facts backed up before we release anything. As governor, would you direct your Attorney General to follow the federal guidelines, or do you think New Hampshire does it okay? in terms of releasing the names of police officers involved in fatal shootings? Or
That's not I haven't followed that issue, and it's a conversation I would want to have with law enforcement about how they feel about it before I started, kind of supporting a federal concept.
You're supposed to have an opinion on everything. You're not supposed to say you're going to wait and gather facts first. What the hell?
these same questions
I'm
will
not.
come out of left
I
field.
know. Right field.
That was the right field.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
But how about your gender? Is it a plus? Is it a minus? Does it not matter? As you know, Republicans have never nominated a woman for governor. We had Bester Roy, who became governor because Hugh Gallen died after losing re-election. How has it affected your race, or has it affected it at all?
I don't think it's affected it at all, other than I get to wear more colorful outfits than the guys. But
Well, that's their decision.
well, that's true. That's true.
Teddy would look great.
In purple.
Yes.
That's my color. No, I think that, I think you have to run for the office based on your experience and your principles, and I've done just that, and I have never even thought about that issue. It shouldn't be an issue.
Great.
About doors at the State House. They're locked. The back doors are locked for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Does Governor Forrester agree with that, or do you think it should be changed?
I've struggled many days now getting in that back door. Well, on the other side of that, and I wasn't involved in the study, but my understanding is if we don't, that was the solution. Otherwise, it means hiring more security guards. And so that was the solution. So I know there are some who don't support that idea.
So you have to walk around to the front of the building to get in if you don't have a pass?
Yes, you do, but
What a terrible thing.
I do, yeah, exercise.
Yeah, well, in the winter maybe, but
Yeah. It's something that I haven't been down in the details about what that would cost or what that would look like. I've got my pass key. It's not bothering me. I just have to set my purse down and then swipe the card and go in.
okay. Guard, yes. Rumble strips, no. If you got a pass key, you can get in.
And
This is the security governor here. Anything else?
Those are all my right field questions for today.
Yeah, well, my last right field question is about, Republicans have lost 9 of the last 10 elections
have.
for this office.
that's why I think I'm the perfect
Yeah, why are you the perfect
I
candidate
am.
to change that?
9 out of the last 10 elections, and I will tell you, it's, clearly we get through primary, but it's in the general election. And I think here in New Hampshire, clearly the voters have said they don't want the traditional establishment candidate. They want someone different. And I believe I am that candidate because I come from community, Main Street. I have fought for the last 6 years for people. I've won up against the establishment. I've gone up against the lobbyists. I'm not afraid of that. I know why I'm there. I know why I want to do this. And that makes me different. Plus, I do have the experience. I know the state budget. I understand how state government works. And I know how to get along with people and work together.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thanks.
If you make it through this round, we'll have you back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.